Do you know what American pilots saw during their first combat missions over France? March 1918. The United States had been at war for 11 months. Fresh American pilots were finally entering combat against the Imperial German Air Service. Young men who had trained on obsolete aircraft, flying missions over hostile territory for the first time. We know this history. What we don't know, what has been systematically erased from official records for over a century, is what some of those pilots encountered, what they reported seeing during their first combat patrols, what happened when they filed reports describing objects that matched their every maneuver with perfect precision.
March 19th, 1918, over Toul, France. The 94th Aero Squadron, known as the Hat in the Ring Squadron, had arrived at the front 3 weeks earlier. They were equipped with French-built Nieuport 28 fighters, single-seat biplanes with a top speed of 122 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 17,000 feet. The squadron had not yet been cleared for combat operations. Pilots were conducting familiarization patrols, learning the geography, understanding the front lines. No offensive operations, no engagement with enemy aircraft, reconnaissance only. The American Expeditionary Forces had entered the war in April 1917, but air operations remained limited through most of that year. By March 1918, American pilots were finally beginning to take their place alongside French and British squadrons. The 94th was among the first American pursuit squadrons to reach operational status. Their arrival represented a significant milestone in American military aviation history. At 08:15 hours on March 19th, Second Lieutenant Frank Hayes took off from Jango Aerodrome on his first solo patrol. But what Hayes encountered during those 90 minutes would change everything.
Second Lieutenant Frank Hayes, 23 years old, from Indianapolis, Indiana. He had enlisted in the Aviation Section Signal Corps in June 1917, responding to the call for volunteers as America mobilized for war. He had left behind a position at an insurance firm and a fiancée who would never see him again. Trained at Issoudun, the largest American flying training facility in France, 47 hours of flight time, 12 hours in the Nieuport 28. He was considered a competent pilot by his instructors, careful, methodical, not prone to recklessness. His training reports described him as steady under pressure and technically proficient. These were the qualities that made good pilots in 1918. His mission that morning was simple: patrol the line between Toul and Beaumont, observe German positions, return to base. Duration 90 minutes, altitude 12,000 feet, weather clear, visibility unlimited. A routine familiarization flight, the kind that dozens of pilots flew every day without incident. He had been airborne for 23 minutes when he encountered something that should not exist. What happened next would be documented in meticulous detail, then systematically erased from the historical record. At 8:38 hours, while flying east toward the village of Limey, Hayes noticed an object approximately 2,000 feet above him. His after-action report, filed at 10:15 hours that morning and confiscated by intelligence 6 hours later, described it in meticulous detail. The object appeared metallic, reflecting sunlight. Roughly cylindrical in shape, approximately 40 feet in length based on comparison to his own aircraft's wingspan. No visible wings, no propeller, no exhaust. Completely silent at a distance where any aircraft engine would be clearly audible. The throaty roar of a rotary engine could be heard for miles. This object produced no sound whatsoever. Hayes assumed it was a German observation aircraft and decided to investigate. He executed a climbing turn to the left to gain altitude. The object executed an identical climbing turn to the left simultaneously, not following Hayes, not reacting to his movement, mirroring it instantaneously. Hayes leveled off at 13,500 feet.
The object leveled off at the exact same moment, maintaining its position 2,000 feet above and slightly ahead. He pushed the stick forward into a shallow dive. The object dove at the exact same angle. He pulled back into a climb. The object climbed in perfect synchronization. For the next 12 minutes, Second Lieutenant Frank Hayes tested every maneuver he knew. Right banking turn, the object banked right simultaneously. S turns across the sky, the object replicated each curve precisely. An Immelman turn, rolling inverted at the top of a loop, the object executed the same maneuver at the exact instant Hayes initiated it. Not with a delay, not following, mirroring with zero latency. According to Hayes's report, the synchronization was so perfect that it appeared the object was anticipating his control inputs, as if it knew what he was going to do before he did it. But what came next demonstrated capabilities that would haunt military intelligence for decades. The response from American Expeditionary Forces intelligence was immediate and absolute. At 1620 hours, officers from the AEF Intelligence Section arrived at Gengo Aerodrome. Every pilot who had filed a report was interrogated individually. The interrogations lasted between 90 minutes and 3 hours per pilot. According to Lieutenant Campbell, who survived the war and spoke about the incident privately in 1964, the intelligence officers were not interested in explanations. They wanted details, precise timing, exact descriptions, technical specifications. They took extensive notes. They asked the same questions multiple times, probing for inconsistencies. They showed no skepticism about the sightings themselves, which Campbell found striking. It was as if they already knew what the pilots had seen. They confiscated all written reports, all sketches, all documentation. Every physical piece of evidence was removed from the squadron. Pilots were ordered to make no mention of the incident in their personal correspondence. Letters home were subject to military censorship, but this order went further. Any discussion of the sightings, even among squadron members, was prohibited under threat of court-martial. The official explanation, delivered by Major Huffer at a briefing on March 20th, attributed the sightings to a new German experimental aircraft. The pilots were told the matter was classified and that further investigation would be handled by intelligence. No further information would be provided. The briefing lasted less than 10 minutes. The pilots accepted the explanation, but something fundamental had changed in those who had witnessed the phenomenon.
But something changed in Frank Hayes after that interrogation. His bunkmate, Second Lieutenant Edward Rickenbacker, who would later become America's top ace with 26 confirmed victories, noticed the change immediately. In his personal diary, obtained by researchers through the Rickenbacker family archives in 1987, Rickenbacker wrote about Hayes's behavior after March 19th. Quote, "Frank has become withdrawn. He won't discuss the patrol. When I asked him about the object he reported, he looked at me as if I'd threatened him. He said only, 'Drop it, Eddie, just drop it.'" Hayes stopped socializing with other pilots. He spent hours alone, often staring at the sky. He wrote letters home to his mother in Indianapolis every day, sometimes twice a day. The frequency was unusual enough that other pilots commented on it. In a letter dated March 22nd, 3 days before he died, obtained from the Hayes family estate in 2003, he wrote, "Mother, I have seen something I cannot explain, something that makes me question everything I thought I understood about the world. If something happens to me, know that I tried to tell the truth. They don't want the truth. They want silence." Hayes would not live long enough to mail another letter.
On March 25, 1918, 6 days after his first combat mission, Second Lieutenant Frank Hayes died. Official cause: training accident during a routine practice flight. According to the official report, Hayes's Newport 28 entered an uncontrolled spin at 4,000 feet and crashed in a field approximately 3 miles from Gangalt Aerodrome. He died on impact. The aircraft burned completely. No investigation was conducted beyond a preliminary examination of the crash site. But the circumstances of Hayes's death raise questions that were never answered. Hayes had 47 hours of flight time. He had successfully completed spin recovery training at Isudan. Spin recovery was a fundamental skill drilled into every pilot. Any pilot with Hayes's experience could recover from a spin below 4,000 feet. The training was specifically designed to ensure survival from spins at low altitude. The weather on March 25th was clear, visibility excellent. Conditions were ideal for flying. No mechanical failure was documented in the preliminary report. The Newport 28 had known structural issues with its upper wing fabric, but these typically manifested during high-speed dives, not during routine practice flights. Witnesses on the ground reported the aircraft appeared to be under control until it suddenly nosedived without any apparent attempt at recovery. One witness, a French farmer named Michel Dubois, told American investigators that the aircraft fell like a stone straight down as if the pilot had simply let go of the controls. Hayes's body was recovered and buried at the American Military Cemetery at Baccarat. His personal effects, including letters and a diary he had kept since arriving in France, were to be returned to his mother in Indianapolis. They never arrived. And Hayes was just the beginning of a pattern that would claim 6 lives in 8 months. Subscribe if these suppression tactics are revealing something darker than you expected, because the pattern of elimination has only begun.
Frank Hayes was the first to die, but he was not the last. The pattern that emerged over the following months would reveal a statistical impossibility. First Lieutenant Alan Winslow, who had corroborated Hayes's sighting on March 19th, continued flying combat missions with the 94th Squadron. On May 31, 1918, during a patrol over Chateau Thierry, Winslow's aircraft was shot down. He was killed instantly. Official records confirm this. But what official records do not mention is the detailed report filed by Douglas Campbell, who witnessed Winslow's death. According to Campbell's combat report, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 1998 and heavily redacted, Winslow's Newport was not hit by enemy fire. Campbell stated that Winslow had successfully disengaged from a German Fokker D-7 and was returning to friendly lines when his aircraft suddenly lost altitude without visible damage and crashed. The section of the report describing the final moments was redacted entirely. Only one sentence remained legible. Request immediate investigation of circumstances not consistent with standard combat loss. No investigation was conducted. Winslow was listed as killed in action by enemy aircraft. The case was closed. Second Lieutenant James Reed, 95th Aero Squadron, had filed a report on March 19th describing an object identical to what Hayes observed. Reed was transferred to a different squadron on March 27th, 2 days after Hayes's death. Official reason: administrative reassignment. On April 14, 1918, Reed was shot down over Vauban. German records captured after the war and archived at the U.S. National Archives show no German aircraft in that sector on April 14th. The weather was listed as unflyable, heavy rain, visibility less than 500 meters, cloud ceiling at 300 feet. Reed was flying alone, which violated standing orders prohibiting solo patrols in adverse weather. His body was recovered by French forces 3 days later. Medical examination noted injuries inconsistent with a standard aircraft crash. The attending surgeon, Captain Louis Moreau, French Army Medical Corps, wrote in his report, "Multiple fractures suggest impact from extreme altitude, yet aircraft wreckage indicates low-speed ground collision. Contradictory findings warrant further investigation." No further investigation was authorized. Reed was buried at Romagne-sous-Montfaucon American Cemetery. His file was sealed in 1919. It remained sealed until 2044. But the deaths did not stop when the war ended.
Captain Howard Burdick, 94th Aero Squadron senior pilot, had been flying as an observer during one of the March 19th encounters. Burdick had not filed a formal report, but had been present during the squadron debriefing when pilots discussed their sightings. He survived the war with 8 confirmed victories. He returned to the United States in January 1919 and was discharged with full honors. In 1923, Burdick began corresponding with a journalist named Robert Crawford, who was researching unexplained aerial phenomena during the war. Burdick agreed to provide testimony about the March 19th incidents. In a letter dated September 12, 1923, Burdick wrote, "I know what those men saw because I saw it too. It wasn't German. It wasn't ours. It wasn't anything that should have been in the sky in 1918, and they killed Frank Hayes because he wouldn't shut up about it." On September 19, 1923, 7 days after mailing that letter, Howard Burdick died. He fell from the roof of his apartment building in New York City. Witnesses reported he had been standing near the edge, looking at the sky. No one saw him move toward the edge. No one saw him jump or fall. He simply went over. The inquest ruled accidental death within 48 hours. No autopsy was performed at the request of the family, according to official records. The family denied making any such request. The letter to Crawford never reached him. It was intercepted by postal authorities, logged as suspicious correspondence, and forwarded to the U.S. Military Intelligence Division. It was declassified in 1994 as part of routine document releases. The declassified version is heavily redacted. Only Burdick's name and the date remain fully legible. Even high-ranking officers who knew about the incident maintained decades of silence.
Lieutenant Carl Spaatz, who would later become a 4-star general and the first chief of staff of the U.S. Air Force, was stationed at Toul in March 1918. He was not a pilot with the 94th Squadron, but served with the 2nd Aero Squadron nearby. He was present at Gengult Aerodrome on March 19th and witnessed the arrival of intelligence officers. In 1962, during an interview for an oral history project conducted by the Air Force Historical Research Agency, Spaatz was asked about unusual incidents during his service in France. His response, preserved in the interview transcript: "There were things we saw that we were ordered not to discuss. Things that didn't make sense then and don't make sense now. I won't elaborate. Some orders remain in effect even decades later." When pressed for details, Spaatz ended the interview. That section of the transcript was marked restricted until 2012. It was declassified with no explanation for the 50-year restriction. By the end of 1918, of the 8 pilots who filed reports on March 19th, 6 were dead. Hayes, training accident, March 25th. Winslow, combat loss with contradictory circumstances, May 31st. Reed, shot down in conditions that should have grounded all aircraft, April 14th. 3 additional pilots from the 95th Squadron died between April and November 1918. All listed as combat casualties, all under circumstances that contained irregularities noted in after-action reports, but never investigated. The statistical probability of this mortality rate, calculated by aerospace historian Dr. Raymond Foster in a 2007 study, was approximately 0.0003%. These were not men in the same aircraft shot down together. These were pilots scattered across different squadrons, flying different missions, dying in different months. Yet they shared one commonality. They had all witnessed the same phenomenon and reported it, and they were dying at a rate that defied statistical probability. The suppression extended far beyond the elimination of witnesses.
The official records offer no explanation. The March 19th incident does not appear in the official history of the 94th Aero Squadron published by the War Department in 1920. It does not appear in any history of the U.S. Air Service operations in 1918. The Intelligence Section reports from March 1918, held at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, contain a gap. Reports filed between March 18th and March 21st are missing. The registry shows they existed. The files themselves cannot be located. Researchers attempting to access related documents through Freedom of Information Act requests have been told that materials pertaining to aerial observations March 1918 tool sector remain classified under national security exemptions. The reason provided, disclosure could reveal intelligence sources and methods still in use. Intelligence sources and methods from 1918 still in use in the 21st century? Let that sink in. Army records show Hayes's personal effects were shipped on April 2, 1918. They were tracked as far as the port of Brest. After that, no record exists. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes filed multiple requests for her son's belongings between 1918 and 1924. Each request was acknowledged. None were fulfilled. The official response stated that the items had been lost in transit. Coincidences? The pattern reveals itself not just in the deaths, but in the systematic erasure of evidence. Documents that should exist cannot be found. Reports that were filed have disappeared. Files that were declassified remain redacted beyond recognition, and classification orders remained in effect for incidents that occurred 106 years ago. But the story is not over.
You're watching this because you sensed something was missing from the standard histories. America's entry into World War I is well documented. The heroism of the pilots, the development of air combat tactics, the birth of American air power. But there was another layer to that history, a layer that has been systematically erased. Those pilots saw something over the skies of France in March 1918, something that matched their maneuvers with impossible precision, something that accelerated beyond the capabilities of any aircraft that existed, something that would be seen again and again throughout the 20th century, always with the same pattern of official denial and witness suppression. Frank Hayes tried to tell the truth. He died 6 days later. Others who spoke about what they saw died under circumstances that were never properly investigated, and the pattern of suppression continues. Files remain classified, documents go missing, explanations are withheld. Why? What about an incident from over a century ago still requires this level of secrecy? What truth about those early days of American air combat cannot be allowed into public awareness? March 19, 2028 will mark the 110th anniversary of Frank Hayes's first and only combat mission. On that date in 1918, an American pilot encountered something that defied explanation, something that mirrored his every move with perfect synchronization, something that would set in motion a suppression campaign lasting over a century. There are researchers, former military personnel, private investigators who track these patterns. Some believe March 19, 2028 may bring new revelations, declassification of additional documents, public disclosure of information long suppressed, Or perhaps a repeat of the phenomenon itself? Whether March 19, 2028 brings answers or merely another anniversary of buried truth remains to be seen. But for those who recognize the pattern, the date carries weight.
I'm sharing this because Frank Hayes' story deserves to be told. His testimony, his death, his systematic erasure from the historical record, all of it demands recognition. If you've watched this far, you understand. You see the pattern forming. You recognize the suppression for what it is. Leave a comment with these exact words: March 19th, 1918. Nothing more. Just that date. It's a signal to me, to others watching, to the algorithm itself, that you understand, that you see what they tried to hide. Don't elaborate, don't add explanation. Just the date. Those who know will recognize it.